The year was 1873, when the Arizona sun baked the land into a shimmering sea of gold and red. Dust hung in the air like smoke, and the wind carried whispers of war between settlers and the Apache. Along the San Pedro Valley, a wagon train rolled westward, families chasing dreams of land and freedom, unaware that they crossed sacred ground. Among them rode Eleanor Whitfield, a 19-year-old woman from Virginia with eyes the color of storm clouds and hands still soft from a gentler world. Her father had uprooted their lives after the Civil War, promising new beginnings beyond the desert horizon. Eleanor had believed him, believed that peace waited somewhere past the frontier, but peace was a myth out here. At sunset, when the wagons circled for the night, the attack came. Out of the canyons rode the Apache, faces painted in crimson and ash, cries slicing the twilight like arrows. Gunfire cracked. Horses screamed. The world turned to chaos. Eleanor ducked beneath the wagon, clutching her mother's locket and praying for dawn. When the smoke cleared, the wagons were burning, the men dead or scattered, and she was dragged from hiding by rough hands. They took her alive. Her wrists were bound, her bonnet torn away, her golden hair falling loose in the wind. She expected cruelty, death, or worse. But what met her eyes was a man unlike any she had ever seen. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his skin bronzed by the desert sun. His hair, black as obsidian, fell to his shoulders, and his eyes, dark, unwavering, held both fury and sorrow. They called him Keone, chief of this band, son of thunder and flame. For 2 days they rode south, deeper into the wildlands. Eleanor did not cry. Fear hollowed her, but pride kept her spine straight. She thought of running, of flinging herself into the rocks, but something in Keone's gaze stopped her. He did not strike her. He gave her water when she was faint and shared his blanket at night when the desert grew cold. Still, he spoke little. When they reached the Apache camp nestled in a canyon painted with redstone and sagebrush, the people gathered to see the pale-haired captive. Women stared. Children whispered. Old men muttered that she was a spirit, a sign from the gods. Eleanor, exhausted and trembling, faced them all with chin lifted. She would not let them see her fear. That night, by the firelight, Keone stood before his people. He spoke in his tongue, words Eleanor did not understand, but she felt their weight. When he finished, the camp fell silent. He turned to her and in halting English said quietly, "You are my wife now." The words struck her like thunder. She gasped, backing away. "Your wife? I am your prisoner," she cried. Keone's expression did not change. He simply said, "You are here by the will of the spirits. My people need a sign. The whites take our land, our children. How the spirits send me one of them to bind the blood and the earth together." Eleanor could only stare. The camp buzzed with whispers. A matronly woman, Keone's mother, Sani, took Eleanor by the arm and led her to a lodge of animal hides. There she was given food, water, and a soft fawn-skin dress. Sani's touch was not cruel but firm, and her eyes spoke of both pity and expectation. Days passed. Eleanor waited for the chance to escape, but the guards were watchful and the desert unforgiving. No stream for miles, no road but the wind-cut gullies of red stone. She would die before reaching any town. She began to realize that captivity might be less a cage of ropes and more a test of her own heart. Keone visited her often. Sometimes he brought gifts, a carved wooden comb, a feather, a silver bracelet taken from a trader. He spoke of the land, of the eagles that nested on the cliffs, of how the white men broke treaties and slaughtered buffalo. He did not speak of love. He spoke of balance, of destiny. Eleanor found herself listening, even when she told herself not to. At night she lay awake listening to the drums echo through the canyon. They throbbed like the heartbeat of the desert itself. Sometimes she thought she could feel the pulse beneath her skin, binding her to this strange, savage place. Weeks turned into months. Eleanor learned to weave grass mats, to grind corn, to ride bareback under Sani's instruction. Her soft hands grew calloused, her pale skin bronzed. She caught herself laughing with the children, humming their songs. The Apache women no longer looked upon her as an outsider, but as something uncertain, neither captive nor kin. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, she found Keone standing on a ridge overlooking the valley. He wore a single eagle feather in his hair, his bow slung over his shoulder. When she approached, he did not turn. He said, "Do you hate me?" Eleanor hesitated. "I don't know," she whispered. "I should. But I don't." He turned then, his eyes searching hers. "The desert changes everything," he said. "It takes what is false and leaves only what is true." They stood there in silence as twilight deepened. In that moment she saw not a savage, but a man, a leader burdened by loss, by a war he did not start. She realized that beneath the paint and pride, his heart beat no differently than her own. That night, the tribe celebrated the first rain in months. Lightning danced across the mesa and laughter rolled like thunder. Keone sat beside Eleanor by the fire. He placed a hand over hers, rough, warm, steady. For the first time she did not pull away. The simple touch felt like a promise, fragile and fierce. When she returned to her lodge later, the storm still rumbled over the hills. She knelt on the furs, staring at her reflection in a copper bowl filled with rainwater. The woman looking back was not the same girl who had left Virginia. Her eyes were sharper now, her jaw set with quiet strength, and in her chest something unspoken stirred, a curiosity that bordered on longing. In the days that followed, the tension between them grew like a storm held at bay. Eleanor felt it whenever Keone's gaze lingered, whenever his hand brushed hers as he passed her a water skin. It was not fear that filled her anymore, but confusion, and something deeper. Yet each night she told herself the same truth. She was a captive, and he her captor. No amount of kindness could change that. But fate, it seemed, had already chosen otherwise. One morning, a scout returned with grim news. U.S. cavalry patrols were moving closer, scouring the valley for missing settlers. Keone ordered the camp to prepare to move deeper into the mountains. Eleanor watched the tribe work together with silent efficiency. She realized that her presence had brought danger upon them. She went to Keone and said quietly, "If I go back, they'll leave you be." He looked at her, eyes narrowing. "No," he said. "They will never stop. To them, I am a ghost to be hunted." She swallowed hard. "Then what am I?" He stepped closer, his voice low and solemn. "You are the bridge the Spirit sent me. You are the beginning. And perhaps the end." Eleanor's heart pounded. She wanted to protest, to deny what those words meant, but she couldn't. Something inside her recognized the truth. The world she had known was gone. Only this one remained. Wild, dangerous, alive. That night, as the moon rose over the canyon, Eleanor sat outside her lodge watching the embers glow. The wind whispered through the mesquite trees, carrying with it a single thought she could not banish. Perhaps she had not been taken by fate. Perhaps she had been chosen. The days in the Apache camp began to move like the desert sun, slow at first, then blazing through each hour until the nights came cool and tender. For Eleanor Whitfield, time no longer measured itself by the ticking of a clock or the shadow of a porch post, but by the drum beats, the smell of sage smoke, and the sound of Keone's voice calling orders across the canyon. At first, she had kept count of the days since her capture, 20, 30, 40, but somewhere after the 6th week, the numbers blurred. She had stopped counting. The world she came from, her father's white-walled house, her mother's tea set, the sound of hymns on a Sunday morning, had begun to fade like a half-remembered dream. Now she woke to the cry of eagles. Her teacher was Sani, Keone's mother, a woman of iron will and quiet dignity, with skin wrinkled like dry leather and eyes that saw straight through lies. From her, Eleanor learned the Apache ways. She learned to grind corn on a stone slab until her arms burned, to plait yucca leaves into rope, to stitch hide with bone needles. She learned words too, mamas for 3, shash for bear, ashki for boy. And through those lessons she began to see what she had never been taught, that these people were not savages, not demons, but human. Proud, wounded, unbroken. The first time she smiled in months was when the children followed her through the camp, giggling, repeating her English words with clumsy accents. "Eleanor," they sang. She couldn't help but laugh. It startled her, that sound of joy escaping her own lips. Keone watched her from a distance, though he said little. He was a man who carried silence like a shield, speaking only when the moment demanded. Sometimes she would catch his gaze across the firelight, dark, unreadable, but always searching her face. He had chosen her to be his bride, and yet he made no demand upon her. He treated her not as property, but as a mystery he meant to understand. And slowly, She began to understand him one evening. Sani brought her to the edge of camp where Keone sat sharpening his knife beside the fire. "You must learn his tongue," the old woman said. "A wife must speak to her husband." Eleanor flushed. "He is not my husband." Sani smiled faintly. "Not yet, but the spirits have their ways." With that she left them. Keone lifted his head, amusement flickering in his eyes. "My mother speaks too much," he said in English. "She says I must learn to speak with you," Eleanor replied cautiously. He set down the knife. "Then we will learn together." And so began their lessons and words traded like offerings. She taught him the softness of English. He taught her the rhythm of Apache. At first the lessons were awkward, punctuated by laughter and mistakes. But over time the awkwardness faded. They began to share more than words. One night as they sat beneath a canopy of stars, Keone pointed upward. "Diyin," he said, "the Great Spirit. He watches from the stars. When we are gone, he remembers." Eleanor looked up, her voice barely a whisper. "Does he remember all of us? Even those who have sinned?" Keone's gaze lingered on her face. "There is no sin in love, only weakness in fear." His words unsettled her. She wanted to ask what he meant, but she already knew. There was something growing between them, something she had fought against from the start. It was not born of gratitude or pity. It was something older, deeper, like roots reaching through stone. In the following weeks, Eleanor began to see Keone not through the eyes of a captive, but as a man bound by the same chains of fate as herself. She learned that his people had been betrayed by treaties, hunted from their lands, their children taken to missions to be civilized. He spoke of his brother, slain by soldiers near Fort Bowie, of the river where his father was buried, of the endless grief that came from watching the land of his ancestors vanish under wagon wheels. "I fight because I must," he told her once. "If we stop fighting, we stop being." Eleanor listened, tears catching in her lashes. "And if you win?" she asked softly. He smiled faintly. "Then the wind will carry our songs a little longer." That night she lay awake in her lodge, the wind whispering through the hides. Her heart was torn, between the world she had known and the one she was beginning to love. Could it be love? She could not yet name it. All she knew was that when Keone was near, the desert no longer felt empty. One morning a rider returned to camp, bloodied, frantic. He brought news that settlers were building new fences along the southern trails, cutting off water holes that had belonged to the Apache for generations. The tribe gathered, anger rumbling like thunder. Keone stood before them, calm but fierce. "We will not strike first," he said, "but we will not kneel." Afterward, Eleanor found him alone by the river. "You could leave," she said quietly. "Find peace somewhere else." He shook his head. "This land is my mother. I do not leave her when she is dying." She wanted to tell him that peace was worth more than pride, but when she looked into his eyes, she saw that for him, pride was peace. Pride was survival. Days turned into nights of unease. Soldiers were near, scouts said. Eleanor began to dream of her old life, her father calling her name, the porch light of their home glowing through the dusk. She would wake sweating, torn between longing and dread. The next day she found Keone by the corral breaking a young horse. The animal bucked and twisted, but Keone's hands were patient, steady. When at last the horse stilled, Keone looked at her and said, "Even the wildest spirit learns to trust if you do not break it first." Eleanor knew he was not talking about the horse. That evening, as the sun fell in molten gold over the mesas, the tribe held a ceremony for the coming harvest. The drums beat slow and deep, the air rich with smoke and song. Keone sat beside her, his arm brushing hers. She felt the warmth of him, not commanding, not forceful, but protective, grounding. When the dance began, he rose and held out his hand. "Come," he said. She hesitated. "I don't know the steps." "Then follow my heart." She did. They moved in a slow circle around the fire, feet tracing the rhythm of the drums, bodies swaying in unison. For the first time since she'd been taken, Eleanor felt no fear, no sorrow, only the wild joy of belonging. The people around her chanted in harmony, their faces glowing in the firelight. She could not understand their words, but she felt their meaning. When the dance ended, Keone leaned close, his breath warm against her ear. "The desert has two faces," he murmured. "One of death, one of life. You have seen both now. Eleanor turned to him, her eyes luminous. "And which am I?" He smiled faintly. "You are the storm between them." That night, as she lay in her lodge, Eleanor knew there was no longer any clear line between her world and his. She was caught between two nations, two hearts, two destinies, and no matter which she chose, a part of her would always belong to the other. The wind rose outside, carrying the scent of rain. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling the wild rhythm beneath her skin. Somewhere deep in her heart, a truth was taking root. She was no longer just the settler's daughter. She was becoming something else entirely. Something untamed. Something free. By midsummer, the desert had turned to fire. The air shimmered above the red stone mesas, and the cacti stood like sentinels beneath a ruthless sun. Life in the Apache camp slowed to the rhythm of heat and dust. And within that rhythm, something deep and dangerous began to bloom. Eleanor Whitfield had stopped feeling like a captive. The bonds that once tied her had long since fallen away, replaced by something far more confusing, a longing she could neither name nor escape. Every morning when she stepped from her lodge and saw Keone speaking with his men, bow slung across his shoulder, she felt her heart stumble. He carried authority like it was part of his flesh, every gesture sure, every word measured. He commanded not through fear, but through respect, and yet when he looked at her, his eyes softened. One morning, as dawn spread across the valley, Keone approached her carrying something wrapped in a length of deer hide. Without a word, he sat beside her and unrolled the bundle. Inside lay a pendant carved from smooth river stone, shaped into the form of an eagle in flight. The craftsmanship was exquisite. Wings stretched wide, talons poised mid-swoop. He held it out to her. "This is for you," he said simply. She hesitated. "Why?" "Because you are like the eagle. You came from the sky and tried to flee, but now you see that even the sky needs the earth." Eleanor traced the carving with her fingers. The pendant was cool and heavy, etched with delicate marks that caught the light. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It is the mark of my people," Keone said. "The eagle sees what others cannot. It chooses only one mate in its lifetime and it never lets go." The words hung in the air like a spell. Eleanor's pulse quickened. "And if the mate flies away?" she asked. Keone's eyes darkened, his voice low. "Then the eagle follows the wind until it finds her again." Their gazes met and held. In that moment, the distance between them, of race, of war, of fate, seemed to vanish. There was only the heartbeat of the earth beneath them and the silent promise that neither dared to speak aloud. From that day on, the eagle pendant never left her neck. Keone began to teach her things he had never taught another outsider. He showed her how to track deer through dry gullies by the faintest print, how to tell the direction of the wind by the tilt of a blade of grass, how to move through the desert without leaving a sound. Under his guidance, she grew strong. Her skin, once pale, now glowed like sun-warmed sandstone. Her hair, once carefully braided, now fell loose and wild. Sometimes they rode together beyond the camp, through narrow canyons where the air smelled of mesquite and sage. The land seemed endless, alive, sacred. "Every stone has a spirit," Keone told her. "Every gust of wind carries a message if you learn to listen." Eleanor smiled. "And what does it say to you now?" He looked at her, a slow smile touching his lips. "It says I am where I belong." She didn't answer. Her throat was tight, her heart unsteady. For weeks she told herself she could not love him. Not truly, not across such a chasm of difference. But every time she looked into his eyes, she felt the pull of something older than reason, older than the war that divided their worlds. And in the desert, the heart spoke louder than the law. One evening, word came from the north, but a warning. A trader's boy, spared by an Apache scout, brought grim news to the camp. A company of U.S. cavalry was moving through the San Pedro Valley, searching for a kidnapped white girl. They had tracked her trail to within a few days' ride. Panic rippled through the camp. Some wanted to send Eleanor away, fearing she had brought death to their door. Others, loyal to Keone, vowed to protect her at any cost. Eleanor listened to their arguments from her lodge, her heart twisting. She could not bear the thought that her presence might doom the people who had taken her in. When Keone entered the lodge, she rose to face him. "This is my fault," she said. "If I leave now, they'll stop chasing you." He shook his head. "You think they will stop because you give yourself up? No, they will come again for more, always for more." His voice was quiet, but beneath it burned the fury of generations wronged. Tears welled in her eyes. Then what am I supposed to do? Keone stepped closer, the firelight carving shadows across his face. Stay, he said. Stay with me. Her breath caught. Keone? He reached up and brushed a strand of hair from her face, his hand lingering at her cheek. The spirits brought you here for a reason. Not as a prisoner, but as part of what is to come. Before she could answer, he leaned close and kissed her. It was not the fierce, claiming kiss she had imagined from her captor. It was something else entirely. Slow, reverent, filled with all the unspoken years of sorrow and longing. When he drew back, his forehead rested against hers. Again and again, he murmured, "You will yield to me until my child grows within you, so that a part of me will live even if I die." The words trembled through her like a vow. She understood then, not of power or conquest, but of legacy, of survival. He wanted to leave behind something more lasting than war. Outside, the wind rose, carrying the cry of an eagle high above the cliffs. Eleanor closed her eyes, and for the first time she did not feel torn between two worlds. She felt whole, her blood, her spirit, her destiny bound to his. That night the sky burned with starlight. The desert, usually harsh and cold, felt alive, renewed, breathing, pulsing, vast. When Keone led her to the ridge overlooking the valley, the moon painted his skin in silver and shadow. "Look," he said softly, pointing to the horizon. "Do you see that light?" She followed his gaze. Far in the distance, a small glow flickered. Campfires. Soldiers. "They are coming," he said. Eleanor's hand found his. "Then we'll go," she said. He shook his head. "No, we will not run. This is our home." She felt a surge of fear, and yet beneath it, pride. The man beside her was no savage. He was the last of a dying nation, standing unbowed before the storm. As dawn began to paint the world in gold, Keone pressed his eagle pendant against her chest. "If I fall," he said, "you must remember who we were. Tell our story. Let the world know we lived and loved beneath the same sun." Eleanor clutched the pendant, tears streaking her dust-stained cheeks. "You will not fall," she whispered. But deep in her heart, she knew the coming days would decide everything. Their love, their people, their very names in history. When they returned to camp, the tribe was already preparing for war. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of gun oil. Horses were saddled, arrows fletched, spears sharpened. Eleanor moved among the women, helping gather food, bandages, and water. Her hands shook, but her spirit did not. In the distance, thunder rolled, not from the sky but from the march of soldiers, and as the first shots echoed through the valley, Eleanor touched the eagle at her throat and whispered a prayer to the desert wind. Let him live if only for one more dawn. The dawn came red as spilled wine, and the air hung heavy with the scent of gunpowder and rain that never fell. In the stillness before battle, the Apache camp stood poised like a single held breath. Women packed what they could, children were ushered toward the canyons, and warriors painted their faces with ashes, the mark of those who would fight until the last. Eleanor Whitfield moved among them, her skirts torn and dust-stained, her hands trembling but unflinching. She tied water skins to saddles, pressed arrows into waiting hands, bound small wounds with strips of hide. She could not fight, but she could serve. In her heart, one name pulsed louder than the drums, Keone. He stood near the edge of camp, framed by the rising sun. His bare chest gleamed with war paint, black streaks across his shoulders, white along his cheekbones. Around his neck hung the twin eagle pendants, his own and hers, which she had returned to him that morning. "Keep it," he'd told her quietly. But Eleanor had shaken her head. "It belongs to you today." He had smiled then, just barely. "Then I will bring it back when the sun sets." That promise was the last thread keeping her heart from breaking. When the first gunshots echoed through the valley, the world turned to chaos. Blue-coated soldiers descended the rocky slopes, rifles flashing in the morning light. Horses screamed, bullets tore through the sagebrush, and the wind carried a storm of dust and death. Eleanor crouched behind a wagon, pressing her hands over her ears, but the sound still pierced her, the cries of men, the roar of guns, the shattering of a fragile peace that had never truly existed. Through the haze, she saw him. Keone. He rode a painted horse down the ridge, bow drawn, his movements fluid as a spirit of vengeance. Every arrow he loosed found its mark. Soldiers fell, shouting orders lost to the roar of thunder. But there were too many. For every man the Apache struck down, 3 more advanced. The army came with wagons, cannons, and fire. They meant not just to kill, but to erase. Eleanor felt something inside her snap. She rose from hiding and ran toward the center of the camp, shouting for the women and children to flee to the canyon. A bullet whined past her ear, striking a post. She stumbled but kept moving. Smoke bit her eyes and her lungs burned. Still, she searched the battlefield for him. At last she found him near the cliffs, rallying his warriors for one last charge. Blood streaked his arm, but his face was calm, eyes blazing. "Coyote!" she screamed. He turned, disbelief flashing across his face. "Eleanor, go back." "I won't leave you," she cried, stumbling through the smoke toward him. But fate has no mercy for love. A rifle cracked from the ridge. Keone staggered, the impact jerking his body backward. The sound tore through her more sharply than any bullet could. She reached him just as he fell from his horse. The world became a blur, shouts, gunfire, the copper scent of blood. She fell to her knees beside him, gathering his head into her lap. "No," she whispered, her tears falling onto his face. No, you promised me sunset." He coughed, blood staining his lips. Even then his eyes found hers, steady, unwavering. "It seems," he said hoarsely, "the sun sets early today." "Don't speak," she begged. "You'll live, you will." I'll find help." He smiled faintly. "You are my help." All around them the battle raged. But to her there was only silence, only the dying man in her arms. He reached weakly to his neck and unclasped the eagle pendant. Pressing it into her hand, he whispered, "Our spirits do not die. When the wind calls, follow it. It will bring you home." Then his hand fell still. For a heartbeat, time stopped. Even the guns seemed to fade. The sky above turned dark with smoke, and the desert wind rose like a lament. Eleanor bent over him, pressing her lips to his brow. Her tears mixed with his blood, and for one impossible moment she wished the earth would open and swallow her whole. The soldiers came then, the living storm of iron and noise. She didn't run. Rough hands seized her, dragging her away from his body. She fought like a wildcat, striking, screaming, her voice cracking with grief. "Leave him," she cried. "He's dead, can't you see?" "Leave him." A captain on horseback pulled up beside her. His uniform was crisp, his face lined with disdain. "Good God," he muttered, staring down at her. "You're the Whitfield girl." "We thought you were dead." Eleanor spat the dust from her mouth. "I was," he frowned. "You've been taken by them too long. You don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying," she hissed. "You call them savages, but you're the ones who came here with guns." The captain's face hardened. "You've gone native," he said coldly. "We'll see to it you're taken back to civilized hands." 2 soldiers lifted her by the arms, dragging her toward the wagon line. She looked back once, to where Coyote lay among the fallen, his hair dark against the sand, the eagle pendant gone from his throat. "Please," she whispered to the wind, "carry him home." But the wind gave no answer, only the low moan of the dying desert. They kept her in the soldiers' camp that night, bound and watched, as though she were the enemy. The men spoke in low voices around the fire, trading tales of the rescued girl, but she heard none of it. Her mind drifted between fever and memory, the curve of Keone's smile, the warmth of his hand, the sound of his voice whispering her name. Sometime before dawn, she awoke with her hand pressed against her belly. It was a small involuntary gesture, but in that instant she knew. A tremor of realization coursed through her, leaving her breathless. There was life inside her, his life. Tears welled again, but this time they were different, not of grief, but of fierce, aching love. She clutched the eagle pendant in her fist, pressing it to her heart. "You'll live," she whispered. "Through me. Through him." At sunrise, the soldiers broke camp. The valley behind them smoked with ruin, the Apache village reduced to ashes. Eleanor rode in the back of a wagon, silent, staring at the horizon. Behind them, the desert shimmered, hiding its dead. Ahead, the civilized world waited, a world that would never understand the woman she had become. The captain rode beside her wagon, glancing over. "You'll be taken to Tucson," he said. "We'll send word to your kin in Virginia." She didn't answer. Her gaze stayed fixed on the east, where the first rays of sunlight broke through the smoke. The captain followed her eyes and shook his head. "You should thank God you're alive." Eleanor turned to him, her voice quiet but steady. "I will thank God," she said, "when men learn to stop killing the things they fear." He said nothing after that. As the wagon rolled on, Eleanor let her hand rest on her stomach. The faintest whisper of life stirred within her, and she smiled through her tears. Keone was gone, but he had kept his promise. He had come back to her with the sunset, not in flesh but in spirit. And though the soldiers thought they had taken her from the Apache, they never could. The desert had claimed her heart forever, and within her grew the living proof, the child of two worlds born of fire and love. The year was 1874, and the war between settlers and the Apache had burned itself into silence. The desert no longer rang with gunfire, but with the lonely cry of eagles and the whisper of wind through the canyons, the same wind that had once carried Eleanor Whitfield's name across the red horizon. She lived now on the edge of Tucson, in a small cabin built from mesquite logs and stone. The army had left her there after her recovery, declaring her a woman who needed time to remember who she was. But Eleanor had not forgotten. She remembered everything: the smell of the rain before battle, the heat of Keone's hand in hers, the promise whispered beneath the stars, and she remembered the life he had left within her. That life now lay sleeping in a wooden cradle near the hearth. A baby boy with skin kissed by sunlight and eyes dark as storm clouds. She called him Talon after the pendant that still hung from her neck, the eagle, symbol of love, courage, and flight. When he cried, she would hold him close and whisper in both English and Apache, her voice soft as wind through cottonwood leaves. "Shh, my son. The spirits hear you. Your father hears you." Sometimes she thought she could feel Keone's presence, a warmth that brushed her cheek when the desert wind rose. The townfolk regarded her with wary curiosity. Some pitied her, others whispered behind her back. The girl who went native, the woman with the half-breed child. They could not understand that she did not live among them, not truly. Her heart still belonged to the wide mesas and the endless skies, but Eleanor did not bow to their scorn. She had learned strength from Sani, courage from Keone, and patience from the land itself. She worked her small patch of earth, traded herbs and healing salves she had learned from the Apache women, and raised her son with quiet pride. When Talon was old enough to walk, she taught him the ways of both worlds. By day she showed him how to read, how to write his name in the English tongue. By night, under the starlit desert sky, she told him the stories of his father. Tales of the eagle that flew higher than fear, of the warrior who stood against the storm, of the man who saw love not as weakness but as destiny. He would sit wide-eyed by the fire, his small hands clutching the eagle pendant she wore. "Was he brave, Mama?" he'd ask. "The bravest there ever was," she'd say. "Did he love you?" Eleanor would smile then, her eyes shining. "He loved me enough to let me live." As years passed, Talon grew tall and strong, a reflection of both his parents. His hair was dark like Keone's, but his eyes carried the steel-gray hue of Eleanor's storms. He moved with quiet grace, spoke with both the gentleness of his mother's schooling and the measured strength of his father's blood. But the world around them was changing. The railroad came slicing through the desert like a silver snake. Settlers poured in by the hundreds, fencing the land, building towns, naming rivers that had no need of names. The Apache who survived lived on small parcels of land, watched by soldiers and missionaries. Still, Eleanor kept to herself, living between the cracks of two worlds. She could not return to Virginia. She could not live among the tribes. So she lived where the sun touched both, in the borderlands where memory and freedom still mingled. On Talon's 10th birthday, she took him to the San Pedro Valley. The journey took days, their wagon rattling through dry creek beds and sun-scorched plains. When they reached the canyon where the Apache camp had once stood, nothing remained but ashes scattered by time. Eleanor knelt in the dust, tracing her fingers through the sand. "This was your father's home," she said softly. "Here he lived and fought and loved." Talon looked around, his young face solemn. "Where is he now?" She touched her heart. Here, always here. They camped that night beneath the stars. The desert air was cool, the silence vast and sacred. Eleanor sat beside the fire, watching her son sleep, the glow of flames flickering across his features. Keone's cheekbones, her mouth, his calm even in slumber. She took the eagle pendant from her neck and placed it beside him. "You will carry this one day," she whispered. "And when you do, remember that you are born of two sons, one of the east, one of the west. Never be ashamed of either." The wind stirred, brushing her hair across her face. Somewhere in the dark, a coyote howled, and in that lonely, haunting sound she felt peace. The kind that comes not from forgetting but from acceptance. When Talon became a young man, the whispers in town followed him like shadows. Mixed blood, they called him. Half Apache. But he learned early that words could not wound a spirit that knew its worth. He rode with the ranchers when they needed a hand, hunted in the mountains with the tribes, spoke both languages, carried both worlds in his heart without shame. Eleanor watched him grow with pride and quiet sorrow. She knew he would one day seek his father's people. She did not stop him. She had seen that look in his eyes before, years ago, in another man's gaze. The day came when he saddled his horse, the eagle pendant hanging around his neck. "Mama," he said softly, "I need to know where I come from." Eleanor stood at the doorway, the sun behind her turning her hair to gold. "You already know, my son," she said, "but go. The land remembers you even if men do not." He smiled, and that same half-smile Keone once wore. Then he rode off toward the horizon, the desert wind trailing behind him like a blessing. Talon found the remnants of his father's tribe deep in the Sierra Madre hills, a small band of elders, weary but proud. Among them was an old woman who had once been Sani, Keone's mother. Her hair was white now, her face lined with years, but her eyes were sharp as ever. When Talon told her who he was, she wept, not with sorrow but with joy. She touched his face with trembling hands and whispered, "You are the eagle's child." For weeks, he stayed among them, learning their ways, their songs, their memories of the man called Keone, the warrior who defied the bluecoats and loved a white woman beyond reason. When it came time to leave, Sani gave him a single eagle feather. "Plant this where the sun rises and sets together," she said. "Then he will know you have come home." Talon rode back to the San Pedro Valley, to the place where his parents' story had begun. There he dismounted, knelt in the red sand, and planted the feather deep into the earth. The wind rose, swirling dust around him, and for an instant, he thought he heard voices, his mother's laughter, his father's low whisper, the beating of unseen wings overhead. He looked up. High above, an eagle circled in the fading light. Talon smiled. "My mother yielded to love, not to power," he said softly. "And because of that, I am the bridge between nations." The desert wind carried his words far across the mesas, echoing against the canyon walls like a prayer for peace, for memory, for love that outlived death. Years later, when Eleanor's time came, she was buried beneath the cottonwoods by the river, her son at her side, the eagle pendant clasped in her hands. The wind stirred through the leaves, whispering across the stones. And some say that when the sun sets over the San Pedro Valley, two shapes can be seen on the ridge. A man and a woman standing together, hand in hand, watching the world they once fought to protect, Keone and Eleanor, the desert bride and her warrior. Their story lived on, carried by the wind, remembered by their son, the child of two sons.